people tend to describe spiritual maturity according to how long they can pray, or for some, how many verses of the Bible they know. While all of these are just a tip of the iceberg, we all know that effective prayer and spiritual maturity takes a little more than that. You're welcome to Catholic Faith Firm. I am Nonso Igwe, and today we'll be talking about effective prayer and spiritual maturity. Joining my discussion today is Reverend Father Henry Kalat, and when we come back from this short break, we'll meet our guests and dive right into our discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Catholic Faith Firm, and I'm Nonso Igwe, and today we'll be talking about effective prayer and spiritual maturity. And my guest is Father Henry Kalat. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nonso. Greetings to you.
Thank you. So ordinarily, I want to ask you what is prayer, but then I will not ask you what's prayer because I know, and I'm sure people know out there, but I want to ask you, what is effective prayer?
Yes, ordinarily, I would have loved to tell you what effective prayer is without telling you what prayer is.
Okay.
But owing to the fact that, we may think that everybody knows what prayer is, so it's better we begin by knowing what prayer is,
my bad.
so that we don't take it for granted that everybody knows what prayer is.
Okay.
So, and in simple language, prayer is, communication with God.
Yes.
In a way, you could even say prayer is a relationship with God. Then coming down to effective prayer, what an effective prayer is, I'd want to take us back to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, from verse 1 to 4. There we are told that Jesus went to pray, and when he was done praying, he returned back to his disciples. And one of them walked to him and said, "Teacher, teach us to pray," just as John taught his disciples how to pray, And it was there that Jesus gave us what we have today as the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And, in the Catholic Church, we say this prayer every day at Mass, every day at Mass. And every effective prayer has to hinge on the Lord's Prayer. Because the Lord's Prayer is not just a prayer, it is a pattern of prayer.
Okay.
Because in it, there are different kinds of prayer.
Okay, can we go into those different kinds of prayer?
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes.
So now, going back to the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said to them, when you pray, say, "Our Father." Now, beginning with the first word Jesus used there, "our." If you look at it, it is a pronoun.
Yes.
But Jesus did not use the first person,
say
singular.
My Father, yes.
He didn't say, when you pray, say, "My Father," but he said, when you pray, say, "Our Father." And what that simply means is every prayer should not just be vertical. It is both vertical and horizontal. In other words, it is cross-like. It is not just a relationship between you and God, but when you pray, always remember that you are not the only person existing in the world.
Oh, okay.
You get it? So when you pray, always have others at heart.
Mind, yes.
So the first word Jesus used there is, when you pray, say, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come." Now, looking at all these words that marks the beginning of, the Lord's Prayer, God is being praised.
Yeah, exalted, yes.
God is being exalted. So, and if you look at it critically, Jesus is saying, when you pray, learn to glorify God first. Also, in the Lord's Prayer, we have petition.
Yes, yes.
We have thanksgiving. Then we have intercession. Okay? And today at Mass, we read from the epistle of James chapter 5 from verse 13, I think, to 20 or so. And there, the first few lines of that reading have it this way. James was passing some messages, and there he said, "Is anyone amongst you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him give praise."
Okay.
That is, let him give thanks. And then, is anyone amongst you sick? Let him invite the elders of the church to come pray for him. And I know the prayer of faith is going to, lift the sick person, so that even if the person is, suffering from certain sins, his sins will be forgiven, and all that. So going back to the pattern of prayer that Jesus has given us in the Our Father,
Yeah.
you know, whenever you pray, the first thing that should come to your mind is the fact that you're not the only person existing in the world. And so in your prayer, you should be considerate of others. So don't just pray for anything that will favor you and then will not favor the other person.
Okay. But there are still some people that like to oppress other people with prayer. They will say, oh, if you don't feel a certain way, then you've not prayed well.
Okay.
So then I want to think and ask myself now, or ask you now, do I need to feel a certain way before I then say, oh, I've prayed well? Ah, yes, my legs were shaking. And because I know this, God has answered my prayer. All those kind of things.
Well, I do not know how you really want to feel. Maybe you want to feel God talking to you before you know that he has answered your prayer. But the truth is, I just want us to go back. Still talking about prayer as a relationship.
Okay.
I'm sure you have a relationship with your father. And whenever you want to make a request to your father, you go with this confidence. Okay? You go with this hope, with this belief that whatsoever you are asking, so long you know what you are asking is right, you go with confidence, believing that your father is going to grant. The only thing that will make you not to go, with some confidence and courage is probably when you yourself know that what you are going to request for is, maybe it contradicts morality, or you're sure that, okay, your father is not going to be happy that you are asking, for such. But truth be told, if you have a relationship with God, you don't need to feel a certain way before you know that God has answered your prayer. So long you have a relationship with God, at all times you know that you have a father who is always there, who is willing and ready to grant whatsoever you ask of him, so long what you are asking for is good.
Thank you. Let's go on this short break. When we come back, we'll get right back into our discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Catholic Faith Forum, and we're talking about effective prayer and spiritual maturity. Now, we're talking about effective prayer. So how do I know that I prayed effectively?
Well, talking about, knowing how effective your prayer is, as Christians, at our baptism, we made certain promises to God. Okay? You promise to reject Satan? I do. And all his works, I do. And all his empty promises. And what that simply means is that we are emptying ourselves of everything that is negative.
Yes.
And then, connecting ourselves to God, who is, the source of goodness, and is even goodness himself. So, for you to know that you have, prayed effectively, it still takes us back again to that relationship we have with God.
Yeah.
Because if you know that what you are asking deep within you, I just give you an instance of you going to your father and then requesting for something. And definitely if you know that whatsoever you're requesting for is good, you have this fulfillment, you have this joy within you and all that. But when deep within you, you know that what you are going to request for is, not in line with
what he wants, yeah.
Good. So for you to know that, you've prayed effectively, deep within you as a Christian, you know what you are supposed to ask for. Because scripture tells us that the prayer of a sinner is an abomination before God. So the first thing, that tells you that you have prayed effectively is when you know that, you have that relationship. You have that faith. Because faith is one of the, key ingredients in prayer. So when you come before God with faith, with hope, and with that sincerity of heart, with that purity of heart, I'll just take us back to the scriptures in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 9. You read downward. The case of Anna. You remember?
Yes.
Anna was, wife to
Elkanah, right?
Yes, Yeah, and
Elkanah.
then they went to Shiloh to pray. And Eli, when she went to pray, she had a co-wife in the person of Peninnah. Peninnah had children and Anna never had. So Peninnah, who happened to be like the second wife to Elkanah, would always make jest of Anna.
Mock her, yeah.
She would always mock her, and that troubled her. So, it was her greatest agony. And when they went for Shiloh, she prayed with faith. And I tell you, she never shouted. She just prayed in silence. It's one of the most effective prayer in scriptures. Everybody there thought that, she was drunk. Even the prophet, even the man of God there, Eli, thought that, she was drunk.
Okay.
But, she prayed in confidence. She prayed with hope, with that belief that God was going to grant her request. And she made a promise to God. If you grant this request to me, I assure you that I am going to return back this gift to you. And when the time came, she brought back Samuel and said to Eli, this is what I asked God for.
Yes.
And he has done it for me.
So now, what is spiritual maturity all about?
Okay, thank you, Nonso. Now, when you talk about spiritual maturity, when you look at that expression, spiritual maturity, two things come to mind. That is, we have two variables there.
Yes.
We have the word spiritual, and then we have maturity. And when you talk about maturity, in a way, you already are making reference to the fact that, there was maybe an infancy narrative. You get it? That is, when we talk, we can relate it to the human person. There was a time you were just a fetus, and then gradually, you came into the world.
Yeah, exactly.
You were a toddler, from an infant, a toddler, you grew up, and then here you are today, a mature individual. So what that simply means is that they're involved, these stages, they were stages of growth. Stages of growth. So in spiritual maturity, we are talking about, spiritual growth, okay? At some point in time, we were neophytes.
What's that?
Yeah, at some point in time, we were babies.
Okay.
We were like infants. Perhaps we were baptized as an infant.
Yeah, it was.
Good. There were some persons that were baptized not as infants, but, they grew up and, they expressed their faith. And, it's one of the challenges that sometimes we face from people of other denominations.
Yeah,
the
questions.
Yes, the question of infant baptism. That why wouldn't you allow a child to grow and then seek for baptism before you baptize such an individual? So spiritual maturity has to do with the fact that there was a stage, or there was a time in our life that we were like babies. And then gradually, we are growing and growing. Spiritual maturity, I take us again back to what I spoke about our baptism.
Okay.
At baptism, even if you were baptized an infant, there were those who stood on your behalf, your parents and your godparents. And then they were asked the question, do you reject Satan? And on your behalf, they answered, yes. But before that, they would be instructed that make sure, as you are standing on behalf of this child, make sure that you monitor every stage in the life of this very child. Make sure that she grows or he grows according to the fear and according to the precepts of God. And if you are baptized as an adult, you also would be asked, do you reject Satan? And then on your own, you answer for yourself.
Yes.
I do. So spiritual maturity has to do with you asking yourself, is my life really reflecting the promises, the baptismal promises that I made at my baptism?
But is it about just asking yourself or just speaking about it? For me, I think that there should be more than speaking. It should be in the actions, the things you do on a daily basis, how you relate with other people. So
beautiful. So it begins with you asking yourself, am I really in line with the baptismal promises I made? And, in that situation, the answers you give to yourself, are far more important than even the question you raised. And the answers shouldn't just be verbal.
Yeah.
But does your attitude, does your actions, do they really show that you are mature spiritually? So spiritual maturity does not just end with you praying, from morning to night. It does not end at you studying the Bible, but how well are you reflecting what you do? how well is your life reflecting, the prayer you're praying? Because sometimes when you go, for spiritual gathering or religious gathering, and most often at revivals, when it's time for prayer, especially when it has to do with,
say
okay, like those that speak in tongues and all that.
Yes.
You see the way they pray. I'm not against speaking in tongues. It's a gift. It's a gift, actually. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you find it there. It's a gift. But, there are those who force it upon themselves, and there are those who also fake it.
Yeah.
So sometimes you could imagine, okay, you're at a religious gathering or a spiritual gathering, and then the same person that does just, probably your neighbor at that gathering prayed and jumped, and then all of a sudden, just outside that gathering is the same person, you just come and meet fighting an individual. So in that situation, where is the growth? Where is the maturity?
Exactly.
You get it? So spiritual maturity has to do with we living out our calling. We living out our baptismal promises. So
is it all about the age of a person? Because I know some people will say, oh, you are too young, you're not yet spiritually mature, or you're too young. I know they do that to a lot of young people like myself, that, oh, you're not spiritually mature because you're too young. So is it about the age? We'll get to this question when we come back from the short break. We need to learn a little about our saints. Stay with us.
Today we are talking about the 7 holy founders of the Servite order. Imagine that 7 famous businessmen from Nigeria left their homes and careers to live together in solitude and prayer. Just imagine. The world will be surprised, and eventually the world will be led to reflect on its values. 7 wealthy, well-known cloth merchants lived in Florence, Italy in the mid-13th century. Bonfilius, Monaldi, John Bonaguinta, Gerald Sostegni, Bartholomew Amidei, Benedict Dell'Antella, Ricoverus Uguccione, and Alexis Falconieri. They found themselves in a society in which many people ignored God's law, riches, and the easy life meant more to these people than the love of the poor and service to the needy. These 7 men decided to withdraw from the city to lead lives of prayer and penance. They chose to turn their lives over to God and give witness to all that is good and true. It took great courage for these wealthy men to leave their prosperous businesses and live a life of prayer and penance. They had been leaders in society, so their decision to change their way of living caused a stir and inspired others to rethink their values and make some changes in their lives. This group of men fostered devotion to the Blessed Virgin, particularly in her 7 sorrows. They called themselves the servants of Mary, or the Servites. Eventually, all the founders but Alexis were ordained. When their order was finally approved, Alexis was the only founder still living. Their feast day is on the 17th of February every year.
Welcome back. This is Catholic Faith Forum, and together with Father Kalat, we're discussing effective prayer and spiritual maturity. So my question, is spiritual maturity all about the age of a person? A lot of young people like myself have been talked down on, oh, you're not spiritually mature, or you don't know this because you're not mature. Why are they doing that? Is it all about age, or, like you said, about what you do, your actions, how you live out your calling?
Well, to answer your question directly, I would say it's a both yes and no. Yeah.
You're being diplomatic.
Yeah, yes, I would explain.
Okay.
It's yes in the sense that, you cannot look at a 2-year-old and say that she or he is spiritually mature. Because at that point in time, the person, even though probably when it's time for Mass, when it's time to go to church, a child could be the one knocking at, the dad's or the mom's room. Hey, mommy, daddy, it's time to go to church, Yeah. But at that point in time, actually, you cannot say that is spiritual maturity. Because at that stage, what that child does is, he or she is kind of Yeah, learning what the parents are doing.
But,
So,
okay.
so,
Okay, sorry.
okay, go on.
Can I go on?
Yeah.
Okay, so I watched a video. Sorry to cut you though.
Okay.
But then I watched a video recently, and there was this little boy of about, roughly, if I were to just estimate his age, he's been about 6 to 8 years old. Yes. And he was praying, like the prayer I cannot pray. I'm not saying with my full chest, but then he was really praying and then speaking in tongues. All his other mates, young children too, were all replying, amen. And then he was praying like a pastor. And I'm like, when I watched that video, I was shocked. I was surprised. I was like, wow. But then people in the comment section, you know, you trust Nigeria. Yeah, this boy is mature. This boy is this. This boy is a pastor. And I just kept wondering that I didn't understand what was going on because, like you said, a 2-year-old cannot be spiritually mature.
Yeah.
So how do you then interpret this action of this boy?
Good. Actually, talking about, like I told you, your question, the answer to your question, if I am to answer them, your question, I would tell you it's both a yes and a no. And
yes.
I've explained why I said spiritual maturity really to an extent has to do with age. And what age am I talking about here? Is the age of reasoning.
Okay.
Okay? Because faith works together with, reason. Faith works with reason. You have to acknowledge the fact that God exists. Like little children who have not attained the age of reasoning, like I said, they just follow their parents. And the notion of God that they have is whatsoever their parents tell them at home. That God is one old man in heaven. You have to be very careful so that you don't offend him. Sometimes some form of funny myths. And growing up, you'd be very careful so that you don't offend that old man, so that the old man will not, punish you and things like that. Then you get to a stage, where you begin to question realities. That's gradually when you are beginning to attain the age of reasoning. Yeah, you begin to ask yourself, okay, God really exists? Okay, if he exists, why am I passing through certain... Then the main, the crux of it is when you attain spiritual maturity to the extent of, you acknowledging the fact that, okay, yes, God truly exists. And whenever I pray to him and I do not get to, to have whatsoever I am praying for, it doesn't really mean that God does not exist or he doesn't care for me. It simply means that God knows best.
Yeah.
He knows what is best for me. He knows the right time to give to me. Even if he doesn't give to me, he has a substitute for that. So spiritual maturity in a way has to do with, like I said, the age aspect. You cannot say of an infant or of a little child who has not attained the age of reason, who is not conscious of God. I think the word there is consciousness. You have to be conscious of the existence of God, and you also have to be conscious of the fact that he is all good. Okay? He is all powerful, he is all knowing, and he is all gracious.
How does your spiritual maturity help you pray effectively?
Yes, of course, without spiritual maturity, it becomes difficult to acknowledge, the existence of God. Because when you're spiritually mature, what happens? Your relationship, remember, prayer is a relationship with God. It's not just communication with God. It is a relationship. And the deeper you go, the stronger you get in, that relationship, the more mature you also get. So, spiritual maturity and prayer are like, they work hand in hand.
Yes.
They work hand in hand. And, the more mature you are spiritually, the more you intensify, your prayer life.
I like that. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure people out there would have learned one or two things from this episode. Thank you so much. You know how we do it. We'll not go until we meet with the Know Your Faith team. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Know Your Faith series. I am Collins, and on today's episode, guys, we'll be talking about how one can recover from that continuous sinful state. And I'll be giving tips that can help us remain in a good relationship with the church. So the first thing to consider in how to overcome habitual sin is to note the change or transformation that takes place when a person is saved. The Bible describes the natural man as dead in sin and trespasses in Ephesians 2 verse 1. As a result of Adam's fall into sin, man is born spiritually dead. But we see that through baptism, we are saved, healed, and obtain graces despite our state. James says, we all sin in many ways in James 3 verse 2. Experience tells us that we struggle differently with sin. Perhaps one sin being more of a tripping point for one believer than another. For some, it might be anger, whereas for others, it is gossiping or lying. We might refer to a sin that is particularly difficult for us to overcome as a besetting sin or habitual sin. Now, these besetting sins are often, but not exclusively, habits that we develop during our lives as unbelievers and require more grace and discipline to overcome. Now, the part of the process of overcoming these habitual or besetting sins is in recognizing the transformation that has indeed taken place within the believer. St. Paul writes in his letter to the Romans in chapter 6 verse 11, "So you also must consider yourselves dead in sin and alive to God in Jesus Christ." When Paul says, consider yourself dead in sin, he's telling us to remember that in coming to Christ, the power of sin has been broken in our lives. Now, the next part of this process is recognizing our inability to overcome these habitual sins and our need to rely on God's power and that of the Holy Spirit who dwells within us. Now, back to Romans 7, St. Paul says that, "For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out." Another part of this process is to change the habit that facilitates it. We have to adopt the attitude of Joseph, who, when tempted by Potiphar's wife to come to bed with her, left the room so quickly that he left his cloak in her hands, as we see in Genesis 39 verse 15. We simply must make every effort to run from the things that tempt us to sin, including access to food if we are overeaten, and access to pornography if we are tempted to sexual sin. Jesus tells us to cut off our hand or pluck out our eye if they offend us in Matthew 5:29-30. And finally, we need to immerse ourselves in the truth of the gospel. The gospel is not only the means by which we are saved, but it is also the means by which we are sanctified. If we think we are saved by grace, but sanctified by our own efforts, we fall into error, as St. Paul writes to the Galatians. Sanctification is as much a work of God as justification. The promise we have from Scripture is that he who began a good work in us will complete it until the last day. Now, I know I may sound like a broken record, and it seems as though some of the things are being repeated and said over and over again. But the truth is that for us to constantly remain pure, these are the things that we just have to do, and we need to do them. It is not going to be easy, but if we put our faith in God, he will grant us the grace to do all these things. So that's it for today's episode. I am sure that you were able to learn a couple of things, and I know that you want to share this. You have no idea what your friends are going through, things that have put them in a state of, feeling very bad or stuff like that. So please do well to share the content, and you can also share with us your experience in the comment sections. Do feel free to subscribe to our channel at Dominican Media Presents. And until I come your way next time, be bold and be Catholic.
Welcome back. Thank you so much, Know Your Faith team. Thank you so much, Father Kalat, for being here today once more.
I sincerely appreciate Nonso. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So thank you so much for sticking with us till the end of the show. You can catch this episode and other episodes on our YouTube channel at Dominican Media Presents. Also, send us your questions and suggestions on our social media platforms at CFF on TV. Don't forget that you can support us with donations. Simply reach out to us with the email address and phone number shown on the screen below. Till I come your way next time, keep being saints in jeans and shirts. Bye.